There are more than 1,000,000 worlds found within the Imperium of Man, each a tiny part of the inexorable grinding force that is humanity's empire. Many of these worlds are unknown, almost irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, but all of them contribute in their own way to keeping the Imperium running as best they can. The world we visit today is among the more infamous of the Imperium's worlds, despite never playing host to a major non-Imperial invasion. It does have its own Astra Militarum regiments and may or may not be a recruiting world for some Adeptus Astartes, but it is the world itself that has become most renowned. Admittedly, I would hesitate to say it is renowned for positive reasons, as most who hear the name would associate it with one thing: the vicious gang warfare that runs rife through its thousands of hives and underhives. Previously part of the Arrhenius continuity, it was conquered by the Imperial Fists in the Great Crusade and is now led by the leader of House Helmore. Formerly known as Arrhenius, it is known today, as it has been throughout its time in the Imperium, as Necromunda. This is Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to 40k Stories. The planet now known as Necromunda is believed to have been inhabited by humans for approximately 15,000 years, which massively predates the Imperium of Man and means that it was colonized around the time of the early Age of Strife. It was known as Arrhenius, or maybe Arenaeus, where they got the name is unknown, and it actually became the capital world for a small human empire in southern Segmentum Solar. A series of ancient warp gates connected it to 5 or perhaps more star systems nearby, and the rulers of Arrhenius became the overseers of the gates. This empire was called the Arrhenius Continuity, and it was highly technologically minded, with cybernetic warriors at its command and its rulers known collectively as Techno-Nobility. However, I think it may be fair to say that the Continuity were a little arrogant, or perhaps just unaware of what was going on even after the horrors of Old Night came to an end. You see, as was their wont during the Great Crusade, eventually the Imperium of Man came calling, though in this case it seems as though the meeting between Continuity and Imperium was an unhappy accident. After the aforementioned cybernetic warriors were sent after encountered Imperial vessels, the Continuity's leaders met with envoys of the Imperium who offered, in air quotes, compliance. The Techno-Nobility couldn't see which way the wind was blowing, if you'll pardon the old Terran phrase, and they refused this offer, even having the gall to suggest that the Imperium become vassals of the Continuity as opposed to the other way around. Unsurprisingly, the Imperium didn't take too kindly to that, and the refusal of a peaceful compliance was met with a forceful one delivered in the form of the 7th Legion Astartes, the Imperial Fists. We don't have an exact date for this war, but I believe it was after the reunion between the Legion and its Primarch Rogel Dawn. The Primarch himself was not in command of the war against the Continuity, but the Force commander was from his adopted homeworld of Inwit, which means he had to have been found by this point. Either way, the Imperial Fists and their allies hit the armies of Arrhenius hard and fast, taking swathes of territory in almost no time at all and seizing the vital warp gates to prevent reinforcement. The entire war took only 2 months, and by that time the Continuity was broken. Only Arrhenius itself remained in their hands, and the Techno-Nobility had no choice but to surrender. Had things gone to plan, the Imperial Fists would have then helped to rebuild the Continuity's worlds before leaving a few warriors behind and moving on. But there was another twist in this tale. From the now secured warp gates came something. A fleet of dark and bloated ships. I'm unsure if this is Chaos or Nurgle related, there's no real data available, I'm afraid. Whatever they exactly were or whoever they served, this fleet was far too powerful for the Imperial forces on hand. All the systems, save for Arrhenius, had their suns detonated, and the enemy were only defeated after the warp gates themselves were destroyed, causing them to vanish. Thousands of Astartes had died, and Arrhenius itself had been devastated, so much so that the surviving Imperial Fists gave it the name it holds to this day: Necromunda. Not quite sure what it means in Gothic, though I'm sure it probably means something like Dead World. The 7th Legion actually maintained close ties with the newly rechristened planet, potentially due to putting down an orc presence or a general uprising upon it. Officially at least, Necromunda is an Imperial Fist recruiting world, one of only two in fact, the other being Inuit, though we know that they at least occasionally do recruit more widely. We do not know what the classification of Arrhenius would have been, but it seems as though Necromunda was before, as it is still now, an industrialized hive world, though this industry has taken its toll on the planet's surface and resources. Necromunda has become a toxic ash waste, its entire landscape mined and poisoned to oblivion in the quest for resources that have long since run out. At this point, the planet is more like a planet-sized garbage heap than anything else, with its people adept at scavenging and recycling what has been left behind by their predecessors. And somehow, despite the situation of resources and the dependence on mass-imported food and matter recycling, Necromunda still thrives in its own way and remains a vital Imperial world. The industry of the planet still produces huge amounts of resources, namely weapons such as lasguns and bolters for the Astra Militarum. And of course, like almost every world in the Imperium, there are the tithes of soldiers that must be fulfilled. There are many Necromundan regiments that have been levied for service in the Astra Militarum, and unlike some smaller worlds which could suffer in terms of productivity from those levies, this is probably no challenge to those on Necromunda. You see, the planet's population is utterly vast, incalculably so. No census has ever accurately been taken, as there are thousands of hives across the planet, with upper-class regions alone having populations in the billions. There are probably trillions of humans on Necromunda at least, and so the Departamento Munitorum could potentially have a field day when it came to recruitment, assuming they had the records. However, this massive population does have one downside, something that is apparently quite common even on hive worlds smaller than Necromunda, that being governance. Given that, as previously mentioned, there is no census data and thus no recognition legally of the vast majority on Necromunda, it is basically impossible to impose any sort of authority on the people in terms of taxes, voting, work quotas, or whatever other things Imperial worlds use their bureaucracy to do. Instead, a kind of feudal system has been adopted, though not strictly in the historical sense. Rather than an individual ruling over, say, a district of people, then reporting into someone higher up the chain, instead people will owe or swear loyalty to others due to family ties or for protection or whatnot. This system obviously is not perfect, but it is pretty stable and keeps most things in order. A group might gain a wider sphere of influence, but it will eventually run out of clout to keep growing, or it will be kept in check by conflict with another power. These conflicts are usually physical in nature, especially in the lower reaches of the hives. Might makes right for the majority, and gang warfare is pretty much an integral part of society these days. You might think that to be only the case in the lower or underhives, but even in the towering spires of the Necromundan elite, there is constant infighting. Granted, there is a measure of political manoeuvring involved in these cases, since there is always the possibility of seizing leadership over a full hive, if not the planet itself, but the houses, as they are known, are still more than happy to get their hands dirty, or at least get some subordinate gang to do it for them. Now, there is a lot to say regarding the houses of Necromunda, possibly enough for a whole slew of logs at some point. So to save some time here, I will provide a brief summary of each of them like I did with the Orc clans long ago. The ruling house, as it has been for at least 7,000 years from what little information I could find, is House Helmore, currently ruled by an individual known as Gerontius Helmore. Known as the Imperial House, Helmore is left to pretty much rule Necromunda as they please by the Adeptus Terra. As long as said Adeptus gets their tithes of resources, finances, and recruits for the Guard and the Astartes, things will carry on right as normal. This gives the Lord Helmore, the de facto planetary governor, a very free hand to deal both with the other houses and with their people. Based in the capital Hive Primus, known to many as the Palatine, they maintain diplomatic and political control over Necromunda, using influence over trade and the other gangs. Whilst all these other houses undoubtedly wish to unseat Helmore to become the Imperial House for themselves, this is pretty much impossible for a single one of them to accomplish alone. Quite obviously, Helmore has deals with all of them. Their favour is a status symbol as well as a mark of protection, and if a house gets uppity and starts making serious power plays, then a simple threat to withdraw that aid and leave them high and dry, vulnerable to the others, is pretty effective. After all, when you have a monopoly on all off-world trade and the only spaceport on the entire planet, you have very little to fear, I would expect. And even if that wasn't enough, Helmor has many agents, particularly within Hive Primus, notably the House Delac that is one of 6 that operate in the Palatine. Delac has long had a shadowy reputation, renowned for espionage and other shadowy behaviour, including supposedly having leaders from other houses on their payroll. However true this may or may not be, Delac is absolutely on the payroll of Helmor, though at a glance you might be forgiven for not noticing. After all, a previous ruler of House Helmor actually disassociated entirely from Delac after a massacre of members of another house, voiding all contracts with them in response. However, behind the scenes, the Helmor ruler of the time used this opportunity to renegotiate the actual arrangement with Delac, as he feared their current deal was a little too obvious and stopped the agents already in Helmor's pocket from operating at full efficiency. The new deal is even shadowier than before. Delac remains completely indebted to Helmor, but no one knows about it, and their agents continue to feed information back to the planetary governor and co. The house that had its members killed by Delac to allow this to happen was the House Orlok, another of the major houses within the Palatine, and known informally as the House of Iron. This is actually for a very simple reason. Orlok controls the majority of the iron production, at least in Hive Primus. Whether they have much of an influence across the rest of the planet is unknown, but I suspect that they at least have a hand in things, since their membership is the most populous of all the Palatine's houses. As for why Orlok and Delac were at war, though I'm sure they weren't friends anyway, the main flashpoint was something known as the Eulanti Contract. This is offered by another of Hive Primus's major houses, House Eulanti, and it awards the house that receives the contract exclusive supply rights to Eulanti. Basically, Eulanti only buys its core resources from the holder of the contract, guaranteeing a very lucrative stream of income and demand for said resources. Delac had been the holders of the contract before that whole fiasco with House Orlok. The leader of Orlok, though, had used gangs to disgrace and sabotage Delac in Eulanti's eyes in order to win the contract, and Delac's blockade of key fuel refineries, among other things, was what led to the massacre that forced the Lord Helmor to intervene. Eulanti isn't just known for its contract, however, as their younger members are deployed into the underhives of Necromunda in order to prove that they are cutthroat and ruthless enough for a future leadership role. Up to that point, these individuals had only known lavish luxury, so if you like, you could consider this a rite of passage. However, they aren't just chucked into the underhive and told to wait for rescue. Instead, they are given a specific task to complete by a sponsor. This could be survival, it could be murder, could be anything really. The youths, also known as spirers, are then issued what is known as a hunting rig, an adaptive, self-repairing suit of armour that also incorporates weaponry and the means to ensure the wearer never lacks for food. Manufactured off-world by some unknown faction, the hunting rigs are able to unlock abilities for the spirers as time passes, and this means that no two rigs will ever truly be alike by the time a spirer is allowed back into the upper hive. There are also many varieties designed for melee, stealth, and more, allowing for even greater diversity as time goes on. By the time that they reach the upper echelons of Eulanti, assuming they make it that far, these spirers will have unlocked all of the upgrades they can get. The Patriarch and Matriarch suits, as they are known, are probably as powerful as they come, though where they rank versus other Imperial armors such as Carapace armor, Power armor, that sort of thing, is actually sadly unknown. One of the more unique houses in Hive Primus is House Escher, a house whose members are perhaps the most vicious of all, whilst also maintaining a powerful sphere of influence. Possibly due to a plague of sorts, their few remaining male members have atrophied into pretty much, well, useless weaklings. As a result, the fighting and political force of Escher are entirely female. Some idiots might say this is a disadvantage, but those people are wrong and will be dead at Escher's hands within seconds for underestimating them. Admittedly, they do have a disdain for all males as a result of what's happened to their own house. They still form deals with other houses, notably Orlok through political marriages and the high ranking of some of their own women, but they do have enemies too. and when those rivalries spill out into gang warfare, as they almost inevitably probably do, the plasma and melee armed Escher gangers can easily go toe-to-toe with any of the other houses. The main source of the rivalries for Escher comes in the form of House Goliath, ever so eloquently referred to by Escher as the Meatnecks. Goliath's members are perhaps the most concerned with appearances in some ways, namely in the way that their members look as physically powerful and imposing as possible. This need for physique comes from their position in the Palatine, geographically speaking, down nearest to the underhives where fighting is much more prevalent, as well as the location of many mining operations. They maintain good trade with House Orlok, who control iron production as mentioned previously, but they are looked down on by the other houses overall in both a physical sense due to geography, as well as a more moral one. Many see Goliath as barbaric and brutish, and to be fair, the house seems to play along with this. Speed and strategy pales to brute force, and their members are often unwaveringly loyal, but also rather mentally unstable. That said, it is said that some of them are actually of a similar size to a space marine, so they have that strength in spades. There have been calls to label them as abhumans in some manner, but that's seemingly fallen on deaf ears, at least up to now. Hive Primus is not the only place, however, where the major houses of the Palatine hold sway. For example, take House Cawdor, the second most populous house on Necromunda behind Orlok. Cawdor is strong in Hive Primus, with their territory bordering Orlok's, but it is in the Hive Temenos, which may not even be in the Palatine cluster, that forms their largest power base, as well as the headquarters for Necromunda's branch of the Ecclesiarchy. Cawdor follows a form of the Imperial creed that seems to be tolerated as opposed to permitted by the agents of the Ministorum, known as the Cult of the Redemption, that actually originated on Necromunda, but has probably become much wider spread across the Imperium. The idea behind it is that humanity is in a living hell and must be purged of all its sins to be saved. Mutations, psychic ability, and heresy are par for the course even for the Ecclesiarchy, but redemptionists must also abstain from narcotics and perform daily self-flagellation as part of their rituals lest they be cast out as an infidel, another one to be purged when the cult goes to war. Cawdor effectively is in the pocket of the redemption cult, though the house must remain somewhat distant from the purging crusades that can even target the Arbites and such if the cult judges them impious enough. This means that relations with the other houses are often tenuous at best and puritanical at worst. When it inevitably comes to war, their masked gang members never show forgiveness and ask for none in return. The last major house to hold sway in the Palatine is House Bandsaw, the most technological of them all. Yuan-ti may have the hunting rigs, but that seems to be the exception for their gear as opposed to the rule. Bandsaw seems to produce all of its own weapons and other gear in-house, and the other houses are also willing to pay a lot for these goods. As a result, Bandsaw is incredibly rich, perhaps even more than Helmore. However, there is a catch for the house's members, one I doubt they have any ways of fixing. They don't fully understand the STCs that they seem to have, and it seems that said STCs are corrupted in some way beyond their understanding. Not chaos corrupted, maybe just data glitches and things like that. This corruption causes the members of Bandsaw to become heavily irradiated, lethally so in fact given enough time, but they are still skilled fighters and their knowledge of Imperial tech and improvements upon them make them a common addition to the Astra Militarum apparently. Perhaps because of their issues with radiation, the gangers of Bandsaw are well equipped to survive in harsh war zones. Environmentally sensitive bodysuits allow them to be well protected and adapted even on low oxygen or otherwise lethal battlefields, and in combination with their high-tech gear and the order that presumably includes extensive training with it, Bandsaw gangers are dangerous to run across. Even if you overcome them, I suspect they have the funds and the favours to bring down the wrath of their many friends in high places. That said, they are renowned for their serious nature and the importance of hierarchy, so I doubt the leadership are particularly brash or quick to anger. Then again, in some ways, in a politically manoeuvrable climate like Necromunda's, that might actually be worse. There is another gang in Hive Primus that I do wish to mention quickly, even if it doesn't have the same sway over the upper echelons like the houses. That group is the Spider Clan, the dominant force in the lower levels of the Palatine, possibly their arrival of Goliath due to proximity, but it's hard to be sure. Like some other powerful gangs on other worlds, the Spiders actually have a deal with the planetary governor. House Helmore has long supplied them with arms and armour, using them as a way to keep other gangs in check and effectively serving as the Necromundan planetary defence force by extension. As such, members are common recruits to the Astra Militarum, and the Necromundan 8th Regiment is actually known somewhat officially as the Spiders as a result. A gang within the clan can form an entire platoon, and higher ranking members will often take the various officer roles. And there you have it, a little insight into Necromunda and its gangs. Honestly, there is a lot to say on this one world. The place is nigh on legendary in its own right, and its gangs and houses are incredibly diverse. We may well be back here one day, though I can't promise it for the time being. I suppose we shall see where our travels take us. For now though, I will say this, if you fancy a long and prosperous life, don't go to Necromunda, under any circumstances, just don't. Now, it is time that we moved on. Next time, I think there's actually something I've neglected to cover that I really should have done by now. You see, we've covered almost every aspect of a certain race up to now, but there are many subspecies devised from that same genetic root. There's a lot of diversity and some fun tales buried in there, so that's what I wish to cover next time. For now, thank you for watching Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.